She's not the problem. She was never the problem. The chaos, the mood swings, the distance, the coldness, that wasn't her breaking. That was your reflection shattering in front of you. And you're still trying to glue the mirror back together. Still trying to manage her reactions instead of confronting the quiet war inside yourself. Still trying to fix the symptoms instead of facing the sickness. The part of you that tolerates less than what your soul was built to carry. You weren't born to manage dysfunction. You were born to lead through it. But something inside you, soft, scared, sedated, learned that it's easier to accommodate pain than confront it. So you adjusted. You dimmed. You called her unhappiness a phase. You called her withdrawal, just hormones. You told yourself, if I just love her better, she'll come back. But she's not lost. She's responding to the vacuum in you. The vacuum of direction, the vacuum of purpose, the vacuum of energy you stopped feeding the moment you decided peace was more important than truth. You stopped building yourself. You stopped refining. You stopped leading your own evolution. You made her the center of your emotional world, then resented her when she couldn't hold that weight. That isn't love. That's laziness. And now you sit in the ruins of a relationship wondering where the fire went, but the fire never left. You stopped bringing wood. You stopped doing the work. You started watching her more than you watched your mission. You started blaming her storm instead of questioning why your foundation was so easily shaken. Because deep down, you knew you tolerated less. You accepted average. You betrayed your own edge, the sacred tension that keeps a man sharp, hungry, dangerous in the best way. You let softness win, not strength in stillness, not peace within purpose, softness. The kind that comes when a man abandons his pursuit of greatness and starts measuring his life by how comfortable he can keep things. And the moment you traded your edge for ease, you lost her. Not because she wanted better, but because you did. You just didn't have the words for it yet. You didn't know how to say, I've forgotten who I am. You didn't know how to say, I've let go of the mountain I was supposed to climb. You didn't know how to say, I made her my mission, and that's why I'm miserable. Because no woman wants to be the purpose of a man. She wants to walk beside his purpose. She wants to follow his fire, not be the fire. And when you forget that when you expect her to replace your edge, carry your drive, validate your stagnation, she breaks, not out of disrespect, out of desperation. Because she didn't sign up to be the leader. She didn't want to become the man in the relationship. She wanted to rest, to bloom, to surrender into a presence that could contain her, not collapse into her. But how can she trust a man who doesn't lead his own life? How can she relax into arms that tremble every time she tests their strength? How can she follow a man who's more committed to avoiding pain than pursuing purpose? She can't. And that's why she's cold. That's why she's silent. That's why she's rolling her eyes when you say you'll change and sighing when you make promises you've broken 100 times before. Not because she doesn't care. Because she's grieving the man she knows you could be the one you glimpsed, but never fully claimed. The one who was bold enough to choose discomfort over disconnection. The one who didn't wait for crisis to act. The one who didn't treat her mood as the problem, but used it as a mirror. Because that's what every moment of chaos is, a mirror. And every time you try to fix her, you miss the invitation. The invitation to return. To the edge, to the mission, to the you who doesn't shrink just because she's emotional, to the you who doesn't fold when life doesn't applaud, to the you who knows that masculinity isn't control, it's clarity. Clarity of vision, clarity of values, clarity of direction. She doesn't need you to fix her. She needs you to fix your aim. Because when your aim is true, when your life is aligned, her chaos calms. Not because you silenced her. Because your presence made the noise irrelevant. But you can't fake that presence. You have to become it. You have to build it in the gym when no one is watching, in the silence before the sunrise, in the moments when choosing growth feels like death. That's where men are made. Not in comfort, in conflict. Not in agreement, in opposition. Not in fixing her, in fixing the part of you that ever thought she was the problem in the first place. Because the problem was never her emotion, it was your inability to hold it. The problem was never her desire, it was your shrinking in the presence of it. The problem was never her chaos, it was your refusal to cultivate order within yourself. Because that's what the masculine does. It orders, it stabilizes, it holds. Not from a place of dominance, but from depth. From a rootedness in self so unshakable that nothing she brings can knock it down. Not her tears, not her fire, not even her silence. You want to fix her? Stand still when she storms. You want to earn her softness? Show her your structure, not your money, not your muscle, your mind. A disciplined, directed, dialed-in mind. One that doesn't scatter every time she pulls away. One that doesn't collapse the moment her validation disappears. One that remains focused, even when affection is withheld. Because that's when your leadership is tested, not when she's loving you, but when she's challenging you. Not when she agrees, but when she questions everything you say. And if you crumble there, if you fold, retreat, react, you prove to her that your stability was performative, that your power was borrowed from her attention, her approval, her presence. But real power is self-sourced. It's born in the fire of solitude, forged in the pain of self-confrontation, tempered in the heat of discipline and purpose. That power doesn't beg. That power doesn't chase. That power doesn't panic when she pulls back, because it knows who it is. And when a man knows who he is, he becomes undeniable. Not in volume, in vibration. He doesn't need to yell to be heard. He doesn't need to fix her mood to feel peace. He doesn't need her love to remember his worth. And ironically, that's when she gives it freely, because now she feels safe. Not because you made her comfortable, but because you made yourself certain. Now she can trust the frame again. Now she can surrender without scanning for cracks. Now she can rest, not because you took away her pain, but because you've become a man who can hold it. But that starts with a decision to stop making her your project and start making you your priority. Not her emotions, your energy, not her reactions, your rituals, not her patterns, your presence, because you are not here to fix a woman who reflects your unhealed wounds. You are here to build a man who no longer attracts the same cycles. And when you become that man, consistent, clear, accountable, aligned, you won't just see her differently. You'll see everything differently, because you realize she was never the chaos. She was a call back to your edge, to your fire, to your sovereignty. And if you answer it not with panic, but with purpose, the whole world around you begins to change. Not because you fixed her, but because you finally stopped betraying you. You stopped betraying your own standard. You stopped making excuses for your stagnation, blaming her reactions for your own regression. You stopped waiting for her to behave differently so you could feel like a man again. Because that's not manhood. That's dependency masked as dominance. You were never supposed to be at the mercy of her moods, her validation, her presence. You were meant to be the constant force, not emotionally numb, not stoic to a fault, but grounded, aware, rooted in a mission that burns brighter than comfort. Because a man on a mission cannot be thrown off by temporary storms. And she will be a storm not because she's wild, but because she's alive. And what she's been waiting for isn't your attempts to fix her. She's been waiting to see if you remain who you say you are when the wind hits. If you'll keep building when no one claps. If you'll keep leading when no one follows. If you'll keep becoming when no one sees it yet. Because the masculine is not measured by control. It's measured by consistency in the face of the unknown. And the unknown, that's where she lives. She's the unknown. She is feeling, motion, intuition, energy. And you are structure, form, focus, direction. That's the polarity. That's the sacred design. And when you try to fix her instead of anchoring yourself, you flip the script. You collapse the polarity. You become the one needing rescue. And she becomes the one who must hold it all together until her nervous system frays, her heart closes, and she finally says the words no man wants to hear. I can't do this anymore. Not because she stopped loving you, because she stopped respecting you, because somewhere along the way, you stopped respecting yourself. You let mediocrity creep in your habits, your health, your word, your leadership. You let your edge dull and expected her to stay sharp for the both of you. But she can't. She wasn't built for that. She was built to expand inside the strength of your presence, to soften inside the heat of your devotion, to surrender inside the certainty of your direction. Not your control, your certainty. But certainty only exists when you've done the work, when you've trained your mind to stay focused, when you've disciplined your body to reflect self-respect, when you've aligned your words and actions until they are indistinguishable. And when you've done that, when she feels that she stops resisting, she stops leading, she stops asking you to fix things you were never meant to fix. And she begins to trust, not blindly, not foolishly, but in that deep feminine way that says, I can finally let go because you've finally shown up, not as the fixer, as the foundation. And from that foundation, everything rises. Polarity, passion, peace, because she's no longer looking for you to repair her storm. She's watching to see if you become the man who can stand in it. And when you do, when you prove through presence and principle that you are that man, she doesn't need you to fix anything. She only needs you to keep becoming. And together, you don't just survive the storm. You build a kingdom through it. A kingdom not made of appearances, not built on forced smiles and performative peace, but forged in the fire of mutual respect, truth, power. The kind of power that doesn't yell because it doesn't need to. The kind of power that doesn't plead because it knows its worth. The kind of power that leads not by controlling her, but by mastering yourself. And when you live like that, when you refuse to tolerate mediocrity in your own being, she will rise beside you. Not behind, not ahead, beside, because now she knows she's no longer walking alone. She no longer has to be both the flame and the frame. She no longer has to protect the very man she wanted to be protected by. She no longer has to wonder, will he ever truly see me? Because you've made yourself seen. You've stopped hiding behind her emotions to avoid confronting your own lack of vision. You stopped projecting your frustration onto her mood swings, realizing they were never about her, they were about your own aimlessness. And now you lead. Not with noise, not with force, with alignment, with decisions rooted in values, with words sharpened by discipline, with presence so strong it softens her without a single touch. That's the kind of man she was praying for. Not the perfect one, the present one. The one who no longer runs from discomfort. The one who no longer abandons his edge every time affection is withheld. The one who no longer tolerates half-built habits, half-spoken truths, half-lived lives. Because you've remembered now, leadership is not something you wait for permission to take. It's something you decide. You decide to stop fixing her because you were never meant to. You decide to fix the part of you that ever allowed dysfunction to become home. You decide to rise, to build To lead, not for her approval, not for her affection, but because your soul has remembered its assignment. And once you remember, once you stand in that sacred sovereign knowing nothing is the same, she looks at you differently. You look at you differently, because now you've become the man who no longer fears her power, but matches it. And that, right there, is where love begins. Not as dependency, not as performance, but as a union of two whole beings, one who surrenders, not out of weakness, but because the other finally stands tall enough to carry it. And in that, you don't just fix the marriage. You forge the myth of what love can be when mediocrity is no longer welcome at the table, and when the man leads, not to be followed, but to build something holy, starting with himself. Because the man who builds himself builds everything else with reverence. He no longer rushes to control what he doesn't understand, he listens. He no longer reacts from wounds, he responds from wisdom. He doesn't shrink in the face of a fire, he meets it with grounded flame of his own. That is the dance of polarity at its highest. Her chaos, his clarity, her wave, his rock, her feeling, his frame, and that dance only exists when the man refuses to tolerate the death by 1,000 compromises that mediocrity demands. When he refuses to accept the dull ache of good enough, when he stops performing partnership and starts embodying purpose, that's the man who doesn't fix her, because he never needed her to be broken in the first place. He simply became the container strong enough to hold her truth without losing his own. And now, finally, the masculine is back. Not the false masculine that postures and flexes, not the shadow masculine that manipulates and gaslights. The sacred masculine, the one that protects, not because she's fragile, but because he's powerful. The one that leads, not to dominate, but to elevate. The one that holds space for her to unravel and then rise again, more radiant, more alive, more trusting. Because she knows he's done fixing her. He's fixed himself. He's returned to discipline, to devotion, to direction. And from that place, everything aligns. The home becomes harmony, not because it's silent, but because it's safe. The passion returns, not because it's manufactured, but because polarity is back. The respect deepens, not because he demanded it, but because he embodied it. And that's what makes him untouchable. Not his perfection, his presence, not his strength alone, his sovereignty. He no longer chases peace. He is peace. He no longer begs for love. He becomes the man worthy of it. And in doing so, he reclaims the one thing that fixes everything. His standard. Because when your standard for yourself is high, your tolerance for chaos becomes low. Not because you run from challenge, but because you refuse to entertain anything that asks you to betray your truth to keep the peace. And she feels that now. She trusts it. Not because you told her, because you showed her. With every action, every habit, every boundary, every breath, you become the man she can finally fall into, not because you caught her, but because you never let go of yourself. And in that sacred union built on sovereignty, steadiness, and soul, the story changes. Not because she was fixed, because you finally remembered. The man who builds his edge sharpens her trust. The man who rises within calls her deeper. The man who stops trying to fix her fixes everything. Because when you fix the part of you that once tolerated mediocrity, you become the foundation everything else rises from. You stop seeking permission to be powerful. You stop shrinking to maintain peace that isn't real. You stop adjusting your worth based on her mood, her tone, her emotional weather. And in doing so, you reclaim your spine. You stop fearing her fire and start forging your own. You stop resenting her tests and start welcoming them, not as insults, but as initiations. Because now you understand She was never challenging you to hurt you. She was calling you to lead, to anchor, to become the man her soul can rest inside. And now you lead not as a tyrant, not as a savior, but as a force. A force that holds without suffocating, guides without forcing, corrects without crushing. Because your leadership is no longer about control. It's about alignment. Your discipline isn't about perfection. It's about consistency. Your power isn't about dominance. It's about direction. You no longer fold under emotion, yours or hers, because you've built a foundation strong enough to feel without flinching. And that's what she trusts now. Not the words, not the promises, the energy. Because energy is everything. The way you walk into the room, the way you speak with integrity, not intention. The way you hold her eyes when she's in her storm and don't blink. She's no longer watching your mouth. She's watching your movement. Do you lead yourself, or are you still a slave to your comforts? Still a boy in a man's clothing, performing presence while avoiding purpose? Because now the illusion is gone. And, she wasn't the project. You were. She wasn't the chaos. She was a compass, pointing you back to the man you were meant to become, not through approval, but through pressure. And now you felt it. The weight, the edge, the invitation to either step up or stay average. And you're done choosing average. Because average love is not love. It's survival. Average masculinity is not power. It's fear dressed in logic. Average leadership is not safety. It's stagnation painted as calm. And you were never meant to live an average life. You were never meant to sit in rooms where your soul must be silent to keep the peace. You were never meant to live with a woman who fears your softness because your strength is absent. You were meant to lead. Lead yourself. Lead your home. Lead your mission. Not perfectly, but relentlessly. And from that posture, everything else heals. Not because you forced it, because you became it. Because you stopped waiting for change to arrive at your doorstep. And you became the storm that shattered the old story. The storm that redefined what it means to be a man. Not one who fixes her. One who builds himself so deeply that she heals in his presence without him saying a word. That's the man you were born to be. Not someday. No. And now there are no more excuses. No one left to blame. No more fixing her. Only you face to face with your reflection. Stripped of illusion, stripped of noise, stripped of the mask. And you will either lead or you will lose everything. Not because she stopped loving you, but because she could no longer see the man she once trusted to follow. She doesn't need you to fix her. She needs you to fix the part of you that ever allowed mediocrity to feel like home. The part of you that chose comfort over calling. The part of you that abandoned your fire to keep the peace. You were never born to be a dimmed-down version of yourself. You were born to lead, to protect, to be the grounded force upon which real love can rise wild, deep, sacred. And that begins the moment you stop trying to fix the woman in front of you and start rebuilding the man within you. No more promises, no more apologies, only action fierce, focused, unwavering, only truth lived through presence, not just preached through words. Because when you fix that, when you raise your standard and live by it like a sacred law, everything changes. She changes, you change. The love you thought was dead, it resurrects. Not because you saved it, but because you became the man who no longer tolerates less than the truth. And from the ashes of mediocrity, a kingdom is born. Not built on perfection, but on presence. The kind of presence only a man can offer when he's remembered who he really is. A man who no longer tries to fix her, because he's already fixed himself.